The first sign that something was wrong was not the money. It was the silence. In the top floor of Meridian Crown Tower, Malcolm Thorne sat alone in a glass room designed to look like a sanctuary, but built like a cage. The walls were transparent, yet nobody could see in unless he allowed it. The doors opened only to hands that the system recognized, and the system recognized almost no one. The air smelled faintly of cold metal and expensive disinfectant. The city below pulsed with headlights and rain, and Thorne watched it the way a man watches a shoreline from a sinking ship, measuring distance, calculating odds, refusing to pray. His private dashboard projected across 3 screens. One showed global markets. One showed his companies. One showed the quiet, constant river of surveillance, live feeds from lobbies, elevators, server corridors, and the narrow service hallways that only staff used. Thorne did not watch the world for beauty. He watched it for movement. He watched for patterns. He watched for betrayal. Then his screens began to stutter. At first, it looked like a glitch, a fraction of a second where the numbers froze and caught up again, a tiny hiccup in the feed. The kind of thing his team would explain away with a shrug and a technician's bored confidence. Thorne did not shrug. Thorne did not accept bored confidence. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his eyes narrowing as if he could bully the data into telling him the truth. A second stutter hit, then a third. The surveillance wall flickered on a camera that never flickered, the one watching the corridor outside his vault room. For an instant, the angle shifted, as if someone had touched the camera's housing with a fingertip. The feed corrected itself immediately, crisp and perfect again. But Thorne's chest tightened. He tapped a key. The system pulled up an audit log. It showed nothing, not a single access request, not a single error flag. That should have relieved him. It did not, because Thorne had spent the last 15 years building his life around a single belief. If something looked clean, it was because someone had learned how to wipe the blood away. His phone buzzed once, a low vibration that made the desk feel alive. A message from his chief security officer appeared. Minor anomaly in perimeter cameras. Likely weather interference. Team checking. Weather. Interference. Likely. Words people used when they wanted a man like Thorne to calm down. Thorne did not calm down. He stood, walked to the edge of the glass room, and stared out at the city. Rain streaked the windows like thin, frantic handwriting. Somewhere down there, among the buses and puddles, among the neon reflections and wet asphalt, people moved through the night with simple faith. They trusted stoplights. They trusted locks. They trusted each other's faces. Thorne did not trust faces. Faces lied. Faces smiled while they stole. He turned back to his screens, and that was when the money finally moved. Not a crash. Not a dramatic red plunge that screamed disaster. It was something worse. A soft, careful bleeding. A handful of microtransactions moving through accounts that were supposed to be inert, rooted through corridors that should have been sealed, appearing and disappearing like footprints in fog. Thorne's empire was vast enough that small amounts meant nothing to most people, but Thorne did not see amounts. He saw access. Every unauthorized movement, no matter how tiny, was a hand on the doorknob of his life. He hit a secure call to his CFO. It rang twice, then went to a guarded voicemail. He hit his head of compliance. No answer. He hit his private tech director, the one who lived in an apartment paid for by Thorne, and spoke to nobody outside work. The call connected, but the voice that answered was tight and breathless. "Sir?" the man said, and Thorne could hear the glow of screens and panic behind the word. "We are seeing irregularities. Small ones. Not enough to trigger automated thresholds, but enough to show intent." "Intent from whom?" Thorne asked. "We don't know," the man admitted. Thorne's jaw clenched. Not knowing was a weakness. Weakness invited predators. He sat again, but he did not relax into the chair. He perched on it like a man prepared to bolt. His eyes cut between screens. His fingers moved fast, opening deeper layers of security reports, running internal traces that only 2 people in the company were authorized to run. As he dug, the silence around him grew heavier, not the quiet of peace, the quiet of a hunting field. And somewhere far below, under an overpass that dripped rain like a leaking roof. A boy named Elias watched a different kind of screen. Elias was 13, though hunger had made him look younger when he curled his shoulders in the cold. His hair was too long, not because it was a style, but because nobody had cut it in months. His shoes were a size too big, found in a donation bin behind a church that locked its doors at night. His jacket had a broken zipper, so he held it closed with one hand when the wind decided to be cruel. He had learned the city the way other kids learned video games. Not for fun, for survival. He knew which security guards looked away during shifts. He knew which convenience store clerks pretended not to see him warming his hands over the coffee machine. He knew which alleyways offered cover and which ones offered danger. He also knew something else, something that made him different. He paid attention, not in the dreamy way teachers praised, but in a sharp, hungry way that came from living on the margins. Elias watched faces. He watched hands. He watched what people did when they thought nobody was looking. He watched who got to walk into buildings with warm lobbies and who got escorted out as if poverty were a crime. That night, Elias sat in the back corner of the public library, the one that stayed open later on weekdays. The librarians did not ask him questions if he stayed quiet and kept his hands clean. Elias stayed quiet. He kept his hands clean. He had become an expert in being invisible in ways that did not get him thrown out. In front of him was a computer terminal with warm keys and a mouse that sometimes double-clicked when you did not want it to. Elias did not complain. This machine was a doorway to warmth and information could sometimes buy a kind of safety. He had a small plastic bag beside him. Inside the bag was an old phone with a cracked screen, found near a trash can behind a luxury hotel. It did not power on. Elias had tried. He had no charger, and even if he did, the battery might have been dead for good. Still, he kept it because the case looked expensive, and expensive things sometimes mattered to people who lived in towers. More importantly, tucked behind the phone was a laminated access card. No name, no photo, just a logo embossed in silver, a stylized crown shape. Meridian Crown. Elias had not stolen the card. It had fallen from the pocket of a man who walked too fast while talking into a headset, rushing toward a black car in the rain. Elias had seen it slip, had seen it spin once on the wet sidewalk, and had picked it up before the wind could shove it into a gutter. For 2 days, he had kept it without knowing why. Part of him hoped it could get him into someplace warm, someplace safe. Another part of him did not trust what that card might invite. In Elias's world, doors did not open for free. If they did, it was usually because someone wanted something. Tonight, he typed the company name into the library computer, slow and careful, scanning articles and photos. Meridian Crown Tower appeared like a blade of glass stabbing the sky. Inside it, men in suits smiled beside charts and awards. Headlines praised innovation, praised security, praised a billionaire who had turned fear into profit. Malcolm Thorne. Elias stared at the photo of the man. Thorne's face was sharp, controlled, the kind of face that looked like it had never been softened by laughter. His eyes were not empty. They were guarded. Elias recognized that look. He saw it in the eyes of people who had been hurt so badly that they decided the world would never touch them again. Elias clicked another article. A story about a factory closure overseas. Another about a whistleblower who had mysteriously recanted. Another about a homeless encampment cleared to make way for a revitalization project funded by Thorne's foundation. The foundation's website showed smiling children, but Elias knew the cleared encampment. He had slept there once. He had watched older men and women lose their blankets as bulldozers rolled in. He felt something tighten in his throat. Not envy, not greed. Something hotter, unfairness. Elias did not have the language for it the way politicians did. He did not frame it as policy. He framed it the way a kid frames it when the world keeps stepping on people who already have nothing. Why do they get to do that? He looked down at the access card again. A librarian coughed lightly nearby, a warning that the library would close soon. Elias logged out and stuffed the card and phone back into the bag. He slipped outside into the rain. The city hit him with cold air and wet noise. Cars hissed through puddles. A siren wailed far away. Elias pulled his jacket tighter and started walking toward the only place he knew would be open, a soup kitchen run by volunteers in a church basement. As he walked, his eyes drifted toward Meridian Crown Tower, a shining spike in the distance. It was lit like a beacon, bright and untouchable. Elias had never been inside. He had stood across the street once and watched security guards turn away a woman who begged for 5 minutes of warmth. The guards did not touch her. They did not have to. Their eyes did the work. Elias kept walking, but the tower stayed in his mind like a thorn. A place full of warmth and money and control. A place built to keep people like him out. Above him, in that tower, Malcolm Thorne was watching his empire bleed in tiny drops. Thorne's tech director sent another secure message. We are tracing a series of low-level access pings. Someone is mapping our system. They are staying under the thresholds. They are using public nodes. Public nodes. Thorne's gaze snapped to the map of network traffic. Red dots pulsed faintly across the city, like a constellation drawn by a thief. Libraries, cafes, transit hubs, places where anyone could connect. Thorne felt disgust rise in him, sharp and personal. He had built walls, and someone was reaching through the cracks with filthy hands. He issued commands that locked down parts of the system, sealed segments, rerouted access. His team would hate it. It would slow operations. It would cost money. Thorne did not care. He had once lost a fortune to a man he called a brother, and he had sworn never again. As the lockdown spread, the anomalies did not stop. They shifted. Thorne watched a compliance alert flicker on, a minor one, then vanish. He watched a vendor payment request appear, then get flagged, then get approved by an automated protocol. They should not have touched it. He watched a record of an internal camera update show a timestamp that did not match its own metadata. It was as if someone was not trying to smash the fortress, but to make the fortress turn on itself. His intercom buzzed. A voice from outside his glass room asked permission to enter. Thorne did not respond at first. He checked the camera feed for that corridor. The person outside was one of his long-trusted assistants, a woman who had worked for him for 7 years and barely spoke unless spoken to. Trust, in Thorne's world, was not a feeling. It was an algorithm. It was a score built on years of obedience. Still, his hand hovered above the authorization button, longer than it should have. He let her in. The door clicked open with a soft mechanical sound. She stepped inside, holding a tablet, her face pale. "Sir," she said quietly, as if she feared the room itself might be listening. "Your head of compliance is requesting an emergency meeting. So is legal. There is something moving through the company. They say it is triggering internal reporting pathways." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Internal reporting pathways do not trigger without cause. They say there is cause," she answered, "and they say it is strange." Strange was another word Thorne hated. Strange meant not understood. Not understood meant not controlled. "What exactly," Thorne asked, "is moving?" The assistant swallowed. "A bundle of documentation, transaction histories, vendor chains, old internal memos, things that would normally be buried. The system is surfacing them, sending notifications to compliance as if someone flagged them. But nobody is taking credit." Thorne stared at his screen again, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something close to fear, not fear of losing money. Thorne had been rich long enough to know money could be rebuilt. Fear of exposure. Because the truth was, his empire was clean on the surface by design. Underneath, it had corners he did not let light touch. Contracts that skirted lines. Deals made through layers of intermediaries. Decisions that would look ugly if framed the wrong way. Thorne had always told himself he was practical, efficient, necessary. But the world liked villains. The world liked a story. And stories were dangerous. "Find the source," he said, his voice low. "I want to know who is doing this." The assistant nodded and backed out, the door sealing behind her. Thorne's fingers flew again, deeper, faster, tracing the internal reporting triggers. He watched a pattern emerge like a ghost revealing itself. The triggers were not random. They were not driven by greed. They were driven by a kind of logic that felt moral, as if someone had designed a machine not to steal from him, but to judge him. And while Thorne hunted the source in a tower of glass, Elias sat on the steps outside the soup kitchen, waiting for the doors to open, holding his hands near a vent that breathed warm air from inside. A man in a volunteer apron stepped out and handed Elias a cup of tea without asking questions. Elias nodded his thanks and sipped carefully. The warmth spread through him like a promise. Across the street, a corporate courier hurried past, talking into his phone, complaining about security delays in Meridian Crown Tower. Elias caught the words in the rain. "Lockdowns," the courier said. "Everything's slower. They're acting like there's a breach." Elias's eyes lifted. He looked back toward the tower in the distance, its lights still bright against the dark sky. He thought of the access card in his bag. He thought of the articles he had read. He thought of the encampment cleared like it was trash. He thought of the woman turned away from the warm lobby. He did not smile. He did not feel triumphant. He felt something quieter and more stubborn. A belief that the world did not belong only to people who could afford locks. Elias stood, finished his tea, and walked into the soup kitchen line with his shoulders squared against the cold, carrying in his bag a piece of the tower's identity that it had never meant to lose. Above him, Malcolm Thorne watched his systems tighten like a noose, and he had no idea that the most dangerous person in his city was not a rival billionaire, not a hacker in a basement, not an angry former partner. It was a homeless boy who had learned to see what powerful men refused to see, and the first domino had already fallen. By morning, Meridian Crown Tower looked the same from the street. The glass still caught the pale winter sun. The lobby still smelled like polished stone and expensive coffee. The guards still stood with their shoulders squared, scanning badges and faces, like they were reading a language only they understood. But inside the tower, the air had changed. It was not panic yet, not openly. It was something subtler, more dangerous in a place built on control. Doubt. The kind of doubt that spreads in whispers between conference rooms, in quick glances over monitors, in the way people keep their voices low, even when there is no logical reason to fear being overheard. Malcolm Thorne arrived before most of his executives. He did it on purpose. He liked to enter his building when it was quiet, when it still belonged to him, when nobody had time to bring him bad news wrapped in polite language. The elevator recognized him instantly and took him to the upper floors without stopping. Thorne stood alone in the polished steel box, watching his own reflection shift as the lights passed overhead. His suit was perfect. His hair was neat. His face looked like it had slept. It had not. All night, he had traced patterns that refused to become a name. He had watched internal reporting alerts trigger, as if an invisible hand was pointing at old sins. He had locked down parts of his system, only to find the anomalies adapting like something alive. When the elevator doors opened, his security chief was waiting in the corridor with 2 analysts and a tablet. "Sir," the chief said, and his voice carried that careful steadiness people used when they were trying not to ignite a man like Thorne. "We have isolated the primary access route. It is coming through public networks, but the behavior is inconsistent with a typical intrusion." Thorne took the tablet without asking. He scanned the network map. The access pings hopped between public nodes, never lingering long enough to be traced cleanly. Library terminals, transit Wi-Fi, coffee shops, even a free hotspot near a church. "Why inconsistent?" Thorne asked. "Because whoever it is," the chief said, "is not pulling large amounts of data. They are not exfiltrating financials the way criminals usually do. They are triggering compliance pathways. They are rerouting internal attention." Thorne's eyes lifted sharp. "They are weaponizing my own safeguards." The chief hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Thorne handed the tablet back, as if it had suddenly become dirty. "Find the person. We are trying," the chief said, "but they are using common access points. Their digital footprint is small, small." Thorne hated small. Small was how betrayal started. A friendly laugh, a shared drink, a simple signature on a document that looked harmless. Small was the seed of ruin. He walked toward his glass office, passing employees who pretended to be busy. He could feel their eyes flicking toward him, then away. They were looking for a crack in him. People always did when power wobbled. Inside his office, the screens lit up automatically. The system recognized his presence and greeted him with graphs, alerts, and surveillance feeds. Thorne sat down and began to work again with the cold focus of a man who believed he could outthink anything. But as he dug deeper, something worse than theft began to emerge. A vendor chain in one of his construction subsidiaries was flagged. The chain was legal on paper, but it led through a string of shell companies that had been designed to hide who was being paid and why. Another alert surfaced an old memo about a cost-saving measure that involved shifting liability onto contracted workers. Another highlighted a settlement that had been sealed and buried. Each alert was small. Each one was the kind of thing that could be explained away if you had time. But the alerts were arriving in clusters now, creating a narrative. Thorne's empire was being arranged into a story, piece by piece, by someone who understood that truth was not always lethal on its own. The way truth was presented was what killed you. His intercom buzzed. His assistant's voice came through, tight. "Sir, compliance is in the executive conference room. Legal is there. They are requesting you immediately." Thorne rose and went, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. The conference room was a long rectangle of glass and steel with a view of the city. On most days, that view was meant to inspire conquest. Today, it looked like 1,000 eyes. Compliance sat at one end of the table, legal at the other. A few executives hovered in the middle, uneasy, holding coffee they were not drinking. When Thorne entered, everyone stood up like he was a judge. He did not sit. He remained standing at the head of the table. "Talk," he said. The head of compliance, a woman named Mira Valen, cleared her throat. Her hands were steady, but her eyes carried strain. Overnight, several internal compliance triggers activated and auto-generated preliminary reports. These reports were routed to our regulatory preparation queue. Thorne's face did not change. "Auto-generated by whom?" "That is the problem," Mira said. "The triggers were activated by activity that appears to mimic internal whistleblower flags. They look authentic because they follow our own protocols. But the source is not attached to any known employee ID. Meaning," Thorne said. "Meaning someone found a way," Mira answered, "to make the system think we are reporting ourselves." A quiet ripple moved around the table. A man from legal shifted in his chair, as if suddenly uncomfortable in his own skin. Thorne leaned forward slightly. "And what happens when the system generates these reports?" Mira hesitated. "If they remain in the queue, the next step is review. If reviewed, they are documented. If documented, they become discoverable. And if discoverable, they become dangerous." Thorne's mouth tightened. "Dangerous to whom?" The legal executive, a gray-haired man named Stanton Red, spoke carefully. "Dangerous to the company, sir. To reputation. To ongoing negotiations. To investor confidence." Thorne's eyes flicked to him. "And to me." The room went quiet enough to hear the hum of the air conditioning. Myra's voice softened, but she did not retreat. "Sir, this is escalating. Whoever is doing this is not stealing money. They are forcing exposure. They are creating internal chaos, and they are doing it using our own systems." Thorne straightened, then shut down the system. Stanton's eyebrows lifted. "We can, but it will slow operations," Thorne cut in. "It will cost millions. It will make us look weak, I know." "Do it anyway." A few executives exchanged glances. Thorne saw it and felt contempt. They wanted control without sacrifice. They wanted safety without discomfort. They wanted to stay rich without ever tasting risk. He had built this empire by swallowing risk like medicine. "Sir," Myra said, "if we shut down everything, we also lose visibility. We lose internal monitoring. We could miss other issues." Thorne's voice went cold. "I would rather be blind than watched by an enemy through my own eyes." He left the room without waiting for agreement. Behind him, the executives began to speak in quick, tense bursts. As Thorne returned to his office, his phone vibrated again. Another message from security. Potential physical link. Access card reported missing from facilities contractor. Card belongs to a subcontracted technician assigned to server corridor maintenance. Card last used 3 days ago. Technician claims it fell from pocket outside tower. Thorne stopped walking. A missing access card was not just a lost piece of plastic, it was a symbol. It was the kind of mistake that cost people jobs, maybe lives, in Thorne's world. His eyes narrowed. Where did he lose it? His security chief replied within seconds. Sidewalk near the south entrance. During rain, Thorne's mind moved faster than his body. Sidewalk, rain. A card dropped in a city full of hands. A card that could open doors if someone had the nerve to try. His assistant appeared at the end of the corridor, tablet in hand. Sir, there is also an incident report from the public library. The staff said someone has been using the computers late, multiple nights, and asking questions about Meridian Crown. Thorne's gaze snapped to her. Who? They did not get a name, she said, but they described a kid. Homeless, probably. Dark hair. Small. Quiet. For a moment, Thorne just stared at her as if she had spoken nonsense. A kid. Homeless. Thorne felt a strange heat rise in his chest, something that was not anger exactly, but disbelief mixed with offense. His empire was being pierced by someone who did not even belong to the world of power. A boy sleeping under bridges was tugging on the threads of a billionaire's fortress. It was absurd, and it was exactly why it was dangerous. Because Thorne had built everything to defend against enemies who looked like him. Competitors, lawyers, investors, hackers hungry for money. He had not built his walls for a child who moved through life like a shadow, unseen and underestimated. He forced his voice steady. Find him. Yes, sir, the assistant said. Thorne returned to his office and stared at the surveillance feeds, suddenly seeing the city differently. He had always treated the streets as noise beneath him. Now he wondered what that noise contained. How many unseen lives moved under his windows? How many of them watched his tower not with awe, but with judgment? Down on those streets, Elias was moving too. He had slept only a few hours under the overpass, curled against a concrete pillar where the wind was less sharp. Morning brought the usual problem, hunger. The soup kitchen had fed him the night before, but hunger always came back like a debt collector. Elias wandered toward a busier district where people dropped coins more easily. He did not beg with a sign. He did not perform sadness. He had learned that people gave more readily when they thought they were helping without being asked. A dropped glove returned. A door held open, a quick warning about a puddle. Small kindnesses were his currency. At a corner near a cafe, he spotted a man step out of a luxury car, talking too loudly into his phone. The man's suit was expensive. His shoes were clean. He walked with the loose confidence of someone who had never wondered where he would sleep. Elias watched him and noticed something. The man had an access lanyard clipped to his belt. Not just any lanyard. A silver crown logo. Meridian Crown. Elias's pulse quickened, but he kept his face blank. The man paced, annoyed, waving one hand as he complained. No, it is locked down. Everything is locked down. Thorne is paranoid. So now we all suffer. The word slid into Elias's mind like a key. Paranoid. Locked down. Thorne. Elias did not know Thorne personally, but he knew that type. The kind of man who feared everyone because he believed everyone was like him. The man on the phone dropped a folded paper as he gestured. It fluttered near the curb. Elias stepped forward and picked it up before it could blow away. Hey, Elias said, holding it out. The man glanced down, annoyed, then saw the paper and snatched it with a distracted thanks before turning away again. Elias nodded and walked on, but something stayed with him, the man's words. Locked down, paranoid, everything slowing. The tower was reacting. Elias's bag pressed against his side, where the lost access card sat like a secret. He had not used it. He had not even tried. He was not sure he could, but he had been reading, learning, watching, and one thing he understood was this. Systems built on distrust always overcorrect. They tighten until they snap. Later, he returned to the public library. He sat at the same terminal, fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a moment, he hesitated, not because he feared getting caught, but because he was beginning to understand the weight of what he was touching. Thorne's empire was not just money. It was people's jobs. It was contracts. It was streets and buildings and lives tangled into one enormous machine. Elias was only a kid with hunger and cold and a sense of fairness that would not shut up. He opened a browser and searched again, not for headlines this time, but for how corporate compliance systems worked. He read about internal reporting, about flags, about automated triggers, about audit trails. He did not understand everything, but he understood enough to see a truth that made his stomach twist. Thorne's power was protected by silence. Not only external silence, but internal silence. People inside the machine were trained to look away. Elias stared at the screen and thought of the encampment being cleared, the older woman crying as her blanket was crushed, the volunteers apologizing with helpless faces. He did not want revenge. Revenge was personal. This was something else. This was a refusal to accept that the world was supposed to work this way. He glanced around the library. Nobody was watching him closely. They never did. That was the blessing and the curse of being invisible. Elias reached into his bag and pulled out the cracked phone. He turned it over in his hands and noticed the case again, its subtle logo, the kind that signaled wealth without screaming. He had always assumed it belonged to a business traveler. Now he wondered if it belonged to someone inside the tower. He slid the access card out as well, just enough to see the silver crown. Elias did not know Malcolm Thorne was hunting him. He did not know security teams were mapping public nodes and pulling surveillance from library entrances. He did not know his quiet presence at a terminal had become a shadow on a billionaire's radar. He only knew that when the world is built to ignore boys like him, sometimes the only way to be seen is to touch the machine that pretends you do not exist. Up in the tower, Thorne's surveillance wall began to populate with new images. Public camera feeds near library districts, enhanced and time-stamped. Security analysts were pulling frames, sharpening faces, scanning for the boy described by staff. Thorne watched the footage with a kind of cold fascination. There on one screen was a kid entering the library, hood up, thin, quick. He moved like he expected to be chased even when nobody chased him. Thorne's fingers curled on the desk. A homeless boy, a nobody. And yet the boy's movements were precise, not random, not frantic. The kid looked like someone who had learned to survive by reading the world the way Thorne read markets. Thorne's mind produced an ugly thought, immediate and sharp. If the boy was smart enough to do this, someone must be using him. He hated that his first instinct was not to believe in the boy's agency. He hated it because it revealed something about him he never wanted to admit. He could not imagine innocence wielding power without corruption behind it. The security chief's voice came through the speaker. "Sir, we can put people on the ground near the library, quietly. Follow him. Identify where he sleeps." Thorne's eyes stayed on the screen. "Do it." Then he added, almost like an afterthought, "No mistakes. I do not want headlines about my company dragging a child into a van." The chief hesitated. "Understood." Thorne leaned back, watching the grainy image of Elias disappear through the library doors. He did not feel pity. Pity was for weaker men who needed to pretend they had hearts. He felt threat, and underneath that threat, something he refused to name, the discomfort of realizing that a child with nothing had managed to reach into his world and move pieces. On another screen, new alerts blinked again, even as lockdown protocols tightened. The system was still surfacing old documents, still flagging buried memos, still nudging internal eyes toward corners Thorne had kept dark. The fortress was turning inward, exactly as the unseen hand intended. Thorne's jaw clenched so hard it ached. "Who are you?" he muttered to the empty office, staring at the boy's blurred face on the screen. "And what do you think you are doing?" Down in the library, Elias typed carefully, unaware that the tower had finally begun to see him. The first stage had been invisibility. The second stage had been influence. And now, the third stage was starting to form, the most dangerous one of all, contact. Because when a man like Thorne finally decided a homeless boy mattered, he would not stop until he owned the answer. And Elias, driven by justice and hunger, and a stubborn refusal to stay erased, was about to discover what it cost to pull on the threads of a billionaire's distrust. The men Thorne sent into the streets did not look like security. That was the point. They dressed like commuters, like delivery drivers, like men who belonged in coffee lines and on sidewalks. They carried nothing that screamed authority. No badges visible, no heavy jackets with company logos. Their earpieces were the smallest available, tucked under collars and hairlines. And they moved with the calm rhythm of people who had practiced disappearing. Malcolm Thorne watched their locations on a secure map in his office, each operative a pale dot shifting through the city's grid. From above, it looked orderly. From above, everything always looked orderly. The city itself, though, was not orderly. It was human. It was chaotic. It was full of blind angles, forgotten tunnels, and lives that did not show up on spreadsheets. Elias was one of those lives. He left the library that afternoon with his hands shoved in his pockets and his shoulders angled into the wind. The sun had come out briefly, then disappeared behind a layer of gray that pressed down like a lid. A cold that was not yet snow, but promised it soon, crept into his bones. He walked fast, not because he had somewhere to be, but because moving kept his body from feeling how tired it was. He did not know he was being followed, not in the obvious way. Nobody trailed him too close. Nobody called his name. Nobody stared. But Elias had grown up reading the city like a weather map. He could feel when something shifted. He could feel when a pattern did not match. At a crosswalk, he paused, letting a group of office workers cluster around him. Across the street, a man in a charcoal coat checked his phone for too long, then looked up just as Elias looked his way. The man's eyes slid off Elias as if Elias were nothing. That was wrong. People who truly did not see you did not perform not seeing you. They simply moved. Elias crossed with the crowd, then cut sharply into a narrow side street lined with dumpsters and delivery entrances. He did it casually, like it was where he meant to go all along. Halfway down the alley, he stopped and pretended to tie his shoe. A second man passed the alley entrance without looking in, then slowed, then kept walking. Elias's stomach tightened. He straightened and walked again, his mind calm on the outside and fast on the inside. If someone was following him, it could be police. It could be social services. It could be worse, the kind of men who did not wear uniforms because they did not want rules. Elias did not panic. He calculated. He emerged onto a busier street and headed toward the riverfront, where foot traffic was thicker and more unpredictable. The riverfront was full of joggers, tourists, vendors, and old men feeding birds. It was also full of cameras, but cameras were not what scared Elias. Cameras only saw what they were trained to see. He had learned that machines missed what humans understood. A camera could track a face, but it could not track intention. A camera could log a route, but it could not understand why a boy took it. A camera could watch you enter a place, but it could not notice the way you held your breath when you heard footsteps behind you. Elias blended into the riverfront crowd and moved toward a bench where an older man sat with a paper cup and a wool cap pulled low. The man's beard was gray and uneven, and his hands were rough, red from cold. The man looked up as Elias approached. "Your eyes are moving too much," the man said quietly, without greeting, without judgment. Elias froze for half a second, then sat on the far end of the bench as if he belonged there. "Do you see it?" Elias asked. The man did not turn his head. He stared at the river like it held secrets. "I see a lot of things," he said. "I see suits that walk like they own the sidewalk. I see cops that pretend they are not cops. I see boys that pretend they are not scared." Elias swallowed. "Someone is behind me." The older man's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Someone is behind everybody. The question is who and why." Elias watched the reflection of passing pedestrians in a puddle near the bench. In the shifting shapes, he caught the charcoal coat again, farther back now, pretending to read a poster. "Why would they follow me?" Elias whispered, and he hated how small his voice sounded. The older man finally looked at him. His eyes were surprisingly clear. "Because you stepped on something you were not supposed to," he said. "Or because someone thinks you did." Elias's fingers curled in his lap. The access card in his bag felt heavier, like metal instead of plastic. How do I make them stop? You do not, the man said. You make them choose a story that is not worth chasing. Elias frowned. What does that mean? It means you do not run like a thief, the man said. You move like you are going somewhere normal. You give them nothing dramatic. Drama makes men with power feel important. Elias stared at the river again. Who are you? The man leaned back, letting the bench creak. Name's Jonah, he said. Used to have a real job. Used to wear a tie. Used to believe the world rewarded the people who did things right. Elias studied him. Jonah did not smell like alcohol. He smelled like cold fabric and cheap soap from a shelter bathroom. What happened? Jonah's eyes softened just a fraction. A company happened, he said. A boss happened. A contract happened. Then one day, I was the problem the system needed to erase. Elias felt a spark of recognition. Systems erased people like him every day. Jonah nodded toward Elias's bag without looking directly at it. Whatever you have in there, it is tied to your shadow. Shadows attract the wrong kind of light. Elias's throat tightened. He wanted to deny it. He wanted to be invisible again. But the truth was already in motion. I did not steal it, Elias said. Jonah nodded slowly. That is the dangerous part, he said. If you stole it, it would just be crime. If you found it and kept it because it meant something, then it becomes a story about justice. Men like that hate justice. They can negotiate with crime. Elias looked down at his hands. They were cracked at the knuckles from cold. They did not look like hands that could dismantle empires. And yet something had shifted, and Elias could feel it in the air. Across the city, inside Meridian Crown Tower, Malcolm Thorne was doing exactly what Jonah predicted. He was creating a story. In the executive wing, Thorne sat with his security chief, his tech director, and 2 analysts. The screen showed Elias's path through the city, library to riverfront, riverfront to market streets, and back toward the shelter district. The trail was not perfect. Elias moved through crowds in ways that made digital tracking messy. But the humans Thorne sent were better than cameras. Thorne's voice was low. The boy knows. The security chief nodded. He is changing routes. He is checking reflections. Thorne's eyes narrowed. He is trained. No, sir, one analyst said carefully. He is not trained. He is experienced. There is a difference. Thorne did not like that distinction. Someone is using him. The analyst hesitated. Possibly. But the activity we have seen, the compliance triggers, the pattern of surfacing specific documents, it does not match a typical criminal ring. It is targeted toward internal integrity failures. Thorne's stare hardened. Do not romanticize this. The room went quiet. Thorne turned to his tech director. I want everything shut down until we identify the breach. The tech director swallowed. Sir, if we shut down everything, we stop the reporting cascade. Yes, but we also freeze critical operations. We miss deadlines. We breach contracts. We will give competitors leverage. Thorne's expression did not change. Let them have leverage. I will buy them later. The tech director flinched because he knew that was not always true. Money could buy many things, but it could not buy back a reputation once it bled. Thorne stood and walked to the glass wall, staring down at the city. This boy, he said, as if speaking to himself, he has nothing. That is why he is dangerous. There is nothing to threaten, nothing to take. Behind him, the security chief cleared his throat. Sir, we should consider the internal implications. The compliance flags are making teams suspect each other. People are already whispering about leaks. If you push too hard, you may trigger resignations. Thorne's jaw tightened. Resignations were a form of betrayal, too. Leaving was abandoning. Abandoning proved they were never loyal. Thorne's mind, built on suspicion, made every human action into evidence. Then let them resign, Thorne said. Anyone who leaves now confirms they were weak. The security chief did not argue, but his eyes flickered. Even he, Thorne's most loyal guard dog, understood that a company could collapse, not only from external attacks, but from internal fear. Thorne turned back to the screens. A new alert flashed. A regulatory prep queue had auto-populated again. Even with partial lockdown, something had pushed another bundle of documentation through, flagged as high priority. tagged with language that sounded like an internal ethics report. Myra Vallon from compliance stepped into the office without waiting for permission. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "Sir, the system just generated a report linking our foundation's redevelopment funding to the clearance of 3 encampments." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "That was legal. It may have been legal," Myra said, "but the optics are brutal." And someone attached internal emails. Emails that show we anticipated public backlash and discussed how to frame it. Thorne felt heat rise in his chest. Not because he was guilty in the way the world liked to define guilt. He had never told himself he was cruel. He told himself he was practical. People suffered, yes, but the machine had to move. Cities had to grow. Investors had to be satisfied. The world did not run on softness. Still, he knew how it would look. A billionaire displacing homeless people while claiming to help them. He could already hear the headlines. Myra stepped closer. "Sir, the team is unraveling. Legal is blaming IT. IT is blaming security. Security is blaming compliance. Everyone is afraid. And whoever is doing this is relying on that fear." Thorne's gaze hardened. "Then we remove the source." Myra's eyes flicked toward the screen showing Elias. "You think it is him?" she said. Thorne did not answer directly. "I think he is involved," he said, "and I think he is a link. If he is not the mastermind, he is a door." Myra held his gaze. "He is a child." Thorne's mouth tightened. "A child who has already cost this company millions in disruptions." Myra's voice softened in a way that made Thorne hate it. "Or a child who is forcing us to look at what we have been avoiding." The room went very still. Thorne's eyes narrowed, and for a moment the mask slipped just enough to show something raw underneath. He had been betrayed once, long ago, by a partner he trusted like family. That betrayal had not just stolen money. It had stolen his ability to believe in people without calculating risk. After that, he built his life like a fortress, because a fortress could not betray you. A fortress could only be attacked. And now, a boy with nothing was not attacking the fortress with explosives or weapons. He was attacking it with truth and timing, forcing the fortress to collapse inward. Thorne's voice went quiet. "Find out where he sleeps," he told security. "I want him located by tonight." Back on the riverfront, Elias sat with Jonah, pretending to watch the water while his mind worked. Jonah pointed with his chin, subtle. "Charcoal coat is still there," he said. "He is pretending to look at the river now." Elias's heart thudded, but he kept his face blank. "How do I make them bored?" Jonah's eyes slid across the crowd. "You give them something small," he said. "A wrong lead. A reason to think you are just a kid with nothing. You already are. But men in towers cannot accept that. They need an enemy that makes sense." Elias swallowed. "What if they hurt me?" Jonah's jaw tightened. "Then you make sure you are not alone," he said. "One thing rich men hate is witnesses. They hate eyes they cannot buy." Elias looked at Jonah. "Will you stay with me?" Jonah's laugh was short and bitter. "Kid, I stay with myself. But," he added, and his voice changed, "I can walk you to a place where people do not look away." Elias nodded slowly. As they stood and started walking, Elias felt the strange weight of an unfamiliar thing, someone beside him. Not someone paid to guard him, not someone who needed something from him, just a man who understood what it meant to be erased and decided not to let a kid face the system alone. They moved through the crowd, Jonah's pace steady, Elias matching it. The charcoal coat followed at a distance, careful, professional. Elias did not run. He did not glance back again and again. He did what Jonah said. He walked like he was going somewhere normal. But inside, his thoughts were sharp as glass. Because Elias could feel the city tightening around him, he could feel that the tower's eyes had finally found his shape. And somewhere high above, in a glass cage filled with screens, Malcolm Thorne was leaning closer to the edge of his own distrust, convinced that if he could just corner the boy, he could corner the truth. Elias did not know what Thorne would do when they finally met. He only knew that the machine he had touched was now reaching back, and the next move would not happen on a screen. It would happen face to face. Jonah led Elias through streets that looked ordinary to most people and looked like a chessboard to anyone who had ever lived without a door that locked. They moved past a laundromat where the fluorescent lights made everything seem tired. They passed a convenience store where a clerk leaned on the counter like he hated his own shift. They crossed beneath a bridge where the concrete pillars were tagged with old graffiti and newer prayers. Elias kept his shoulders down and his hands visible. He forced himself to breathe slowly. He forced himself to walk like he had nowhere urgent to be. Behind them, the charcoal coat stayed at a respectful distance, never rushing, never closing in, as if the man had all the time in the world. That was what terrified Elias most. People who were desperate made mistakes. People who were patient made plans. Jonah murmured without turning his head. "He is still there." Elias swallowed. "Where are we going?" "A place where cameras do not matter," Jonah said. "A place where people look up when they hear a boy's voice." They reached a narrow side street and stopped outside a building that used to be an old community center. The sign above the door was faded, but someone had repainted the words in bright white, "Night Shelter" and "Resource Hub." Under that, smaller letters read, "All are welcome." Elias had walked past places like this before and kept going. Sometimes they were full. Sometimes they asked too many questions. Sometimes they treated a kid like a file to be processed instead of a human being. Elias had learned not to trust signs. But Jonah pushed open the door with confidence, and warm air hit Elias's face like a blanket. Inside, the room smelled like soup, detergent, and the faint sharpness of disinfectant. Folding tables were set up with donated clothes, toiletries, and paper cups. A woman in a sweater moved between people with a clipboard, smiling with her eyes even when her mouth looked tired. Jonah stepped in first, nodding at the woman. "Lena," he said. She looked up, and the tension in her face eased slightly. "Jonah," she replied. Her eyes went to Elias. "New friend." Elias did not like being called a friend by strangers, but the warmth made his body slow down enough to listen. Jonah leaned toward Lena and spoke quietly. Elias caught only pieces. "Kids being watched," Jonah said. "Not cops, corporate, I think." Lena's smile vanished. Her eyes sharpened with immediate seriousness. "How do you know?" Jonah tipped his chin toward the window. "Charcoal coat outside, pretending he is waiting for a ride. Been tailing us for a while." Lena turned, subtle, and looked through a sliver of glass beside the door. Her shoulders tightened. "I see him." Elias felt his throat constrict. He suddenly wanted to leave, to melt into streets again, to return to invisibility, where at least danger was familiar. But Jonah's hand rested lightly on Elias's shoulder, steady. Lena turned back. "Come with me," she said to Jonah and Elias. Back room. They walked through a hallway lined with posters about addiction recovery, job training, and housing assistance. Elias looked at the posters like they were written in another language. Promises, pathways, programs. He had heard those words before. They usually came with rules and waiting lists. Lena opened a door into a small office with a desk, 2 chairs, and a battered kettle. She closed the door and spoke in a low voice. "Who is he?" she asked Jonah, nodding toward Elias. "Kid," Jonah said simply. "Smart, quiet, sleeps rough. He is tangled in something big." Lena's eyes moved to Elias. "Why are they following you?" Elias stared at the floor. His instinct screamed to lie, but something about this room felt different. It felt like a place where lies would sit heavy. He pulled the plastic bag from his pocket, opened it, and slid the access card onto Lena's desk. Her eyebrows lifted. "Meridian Crown," she murmured. Jonah let out a breath. "Knew it." Elias's voice came out tight. "I found it." Lena did not touch the card. "Where?" "Sidewalk," Elias said. "Rain, near the tower." Lena looked at Jonah. Jonah's face was grim. "That tower is run by Malcolm Thorne," Jonah said. "He is not the kind of man who lets things fall into the wrong hands and forgets about it." Elias's stomach dropped at hearing the name in this room, spoken like a warning. Lena's expression hardened. "If his people are following you, they are not doing it to return a lost card," she said. "They are doing it because they think you are a threat." Elias felt anger spark in his chest. I did not do anything to them. Jonah's eyes flicked toward him. Maybe you did, Jonah said gently, even if you did not mean to. Elias's hands clenched. I read about him, he admitted. About what he did. About the shelters they cleared. Lena's eyes softened for a moment. You were there, she said, not a question. Elias nodded once. He did not want to talk about the night bulldozers pushed through like monsters, and people cried like their hearts were being scraped raw. He did not want to talk about waking up with dust in his hair and nowhere to go. Jonah leaned forward. So you went looking, he said. Elias's voice dropped. I wanted to know why they could do that, he said, and nobody stopped them. Lena's gaze held him, steady and kind, in a way that made Elias feel exposed. And did you try to stop them? She asked. Elias hesitated, because the truth was complicated. He had not planned to dismantle an empire. He had not planned to trigger compliance flags or surface buried documents. But he had learned that power ran on systems, and systems had weak points. He had learned that you could pull on a thread and watch the fabric shift. And once he had started pulling, he had not been able to stop. I did not steal money, Elias said quickly, as if that was the one line that mattered. I did not take anything. Jonah's mouth tightened. Sometimes taking is not the only way to hurt a rich man, he said. Lena turned her chair, thinking. If Thorne believes you have access to his systems, she said, he will not stop. And if you have done anything that triggers regulatory issues, he will escalate quickly. Elias's heart pounded. What does escalate mean? Jonah's voice went darker. It means the kind of pressure that makes a boy disappear, he said. Not with violence, maybe. With paperwork. With custody. With institutions. With people who say they are helping you while they lock you away. Elias felt fear shoot through him like cold water. He had lived free because he had avoided being processed. He had avoided the system because the system had never been kind to kids like him. Lena reached for the kettle and poured hot water into a paper cup, then handed it to Elias. Listen, she said softly, you have two choices. Run and keep running until you collapse. Or let us create a shield. Elias stared into the steaming cup. His hands shook slightly. Jonah said, shield means witnesses. It means people who know your face and will ask questions if you vanish. Elias's eyes lifted. Will that stop him? Jonah's expression was honest. It will not stop him from wanting, he said, but it might stop him from taking. Lena nodded. We can call our legal aid partner, she said. We can document that you are being followed. We can create a record. That record is a threat to them. Rich men hate records that do not belong to them. Elias swallowed. What if they come inside? Lena's jaw tightened. Then they will do it in front of witnesses, she said. And if they do, we will make noise. Noise. Elias had lived in silence, in invisibility, because noise got you noticed. And being noticed, as a homeless kid, often meant trouble. But now, trouble had found him anyway. A knock sounded at the office door. Lena froze. Jonah's eyes narrowed. The knock came again, polite, controlled. Lena stood and opened the door a crack. A volunteer leaned in, eyes wide. Lena, he whispered, there is a man outside asking if a boy came in. He says he is from a private security firm. Lena's face hardened. She stepped out into the hallway and shut the office door behind her, leaving Elias and Jonah alone. Elias's breath caught. They are here, he whispered. Jonah's voice was steady. Good, he said. Better here than under a bridge. Minutes passed like hours. Elias stared at the access card on the desk. It looked harmless. It looked like nothing, but it had become a fuse. Outside the office, voices rose and fell. Lena's voice stayed calm, firm. A man's voice answered, smooth and professional. Elias could not hear the words clearly, but he could hear the tone of someone used to being obeyed. Then Lena returned, shutting the door behind her again. Her cheeks were flushed, but her eyes were fierce. He left, she said. Elias exhaled shakily. Just like that? Lena shook her head. Not like that, she said. He left because I told him if he came inside, I would call the police and record everything. I told him this is a shelter, not his hunting ground. Jonah nodded approvingly. Witnesses, he murmured. Lena leaned forward, lowering her voice. "He will report back," she said to Elias, "and they will change strategy." Elias's throat tightened. "What strategy?" Lena's eyes flicked to the access card. "They will stop pretending," she said. "They will come to you with a polite offer." Jonah's face darkened. "Or a threat wrapped in kindness." Elias stared at them, feeling like the room was shrinking. "Why?" he asked. "Why would a billionaire care this much?" Jonah looked at him carefully. "Because you did something men like him cannot tolerate," he said. Elias's voice was barely audible. "What?" Jonah's eyes held his. "You made him feel powerless," he said. Elias's stomach twisted. He had never wanted power. He had wanted fairness. He had wanted someone to look down from the tower and feel what it was like to be pushed out into cold. Lena sat back and rubbed her forehead. "If you truly triggered compliance flags," she said, "then you may have exposed things inside his empire that even his executives did not fully see." Elias felt a flicker of something strange, not pride, but realization. The cracks he had touched were bigger than he thought. A phone buzzed on Lena's desk. She glanced at the screen, then looked up at Jonah and Elias. "It is our legal aid partner," she said. "I called them while you were talking." She put the call on speaker. A woman's voice filled the office, brisk and warm. "This is Tessa," the voice said. "Lena said you have a minor being followed by private security." "Yes," Lena replied. "We need guidance." Tessa's tone sharpened. "Who is the firm?" "They did not give a name," Lena said. "But the access card is Meridian Crown." There was a pause. Then Tessa's voice grew more serious. "Malcolm Thorne's people," she said. "If that is true, you need to document everything today. Names, times, descriptions. And do not let the child leave alone." Elias felt ice in his chest at the certainty in her voice, as if his life had just been categorized. Jonah asked, "Can we force them to back off?" Tessa's answer was blunt. "You cannot force men like that to feel shame," she said. "But you can raise the cost of acting." Lena nodded. "Record. Witnesses." "Exactly," Tessa said. "And one more thing. If Thorne reaches out directly with a meeting request, do not refuse immediately. Let me know. Sometimes the best defense is to control the setting." Elias's eyes widened. "Meeting." Jonah's jaw tightened. "He would not meet a kid." Tessa's voice was steady. "He might if the kid has become the symbol of his loss of control," she said. "Men like Thorne do not just want solutions. They want ownership of the narrative. Ownership." Elias stared at the card again and felt the weight of a truth settle on him. He had pulled a thread, and now the man who owned the cloth wanted to seize his hands. That night, as the shelter's lights dimmed and volunteers handed out blankets, Elias lay on a thin mattress in a corner room meant for youth. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the building's quiet creaks and distant murmurs. It was warmer than the bridge. It was safer, but his mind refused to rest, because he knew, with the clarity of a kid who had learned not to lie to himself, that Malcolm Thorne would not let this go. The next day, the approach would change. It would not be a shadow in a charcoal coat. It would be a knock on the door that sounded polite, a voice that sounded reasonable, an offer that sounded like help, and underneath it, a message that would not need to be spoken aloud. "You are not invisible anymore." In Meridian Crown Tower, Thorne sat at his desk and read the report from his operative. The boy had gone into a shelter. The shelter staff had pushed back. There were witnesses now. There would be records. Thorne's lips pressed into a thin line. He did not like resistance, but he respected one thing: leverage. Witnesses created leverage for the boy. Thorne needed leverage of his own. He opened a secure channel and typed a message to his head of security. "Prepare a direct approach. No intimidation. Offer assistance. Create goodwill. Bring the boy to me." Then he added a second line, colder. "If he refuses, find what he loves." Thorne leaned back in his chair, eyes unfocused for a moment. He told himself it was strategy. He told himself he was not cruel. He told himself he was only doing what was necessary. But somewhere deep down, a part of him that he had buried long ago whispered something he hated to hear. If a homeless boy could shake his empire without money, without weapons, without power, then maybe the fortress he built had never made him strong. Maybe it had only made him alone. Part 5. The offer arrived the next morning in a white envelope that looked too clean for the shelter's worn front desk. No logo, no return address. Just Elias's name written in neat, careful handwriting, as if whoever wrote it wanted to prove they understood respect. Lena held it between two fingers, like it might bite. Jonah stood beside her, arms folded, watching the lobby with a tension that never fully left his shoulders. Elias stared at the envelope, his stomach tight. "Do not open it," Jonah said. Lena shook her head once. "We open it," she corrected. "We document it. We do not let them control the story." She slid her phone out, switched on the camera, and recorded as she carefully tore the envelope along the edge. Inside was a single card of thick paper and a second sheet printed with short, polite sentences. The card read, "Malcolm Thorne, CEO, Thorne Consolidated." Elias felt a strange jolt. Seeing the name on paper made it more real than any article or photo. Lena read the letter aloud, her voice flat and controlled. "Mem R. Thorne is aware that you have come into possession of company property. He is not interested in involving law enforcement. He understands the difficulty of your circumstances. He would like to meet you personally in a safe, neutral environment to discuss a peaceful resolution. Transportation will be provided. A meal will be provided. No questions will be asked beyond what is necessary. We hope you will accept this opportunity to start fresh." Jonah let out a short sound of disgust. "Start fresh," he repeated. "That is what they say when they want you to forget what you saw." Lena kept reading. "If you decline, please return the access card immediately to the enclosed courier. Failure to return the card may result in necessary procedural actions." Elias's mouth went dry. "Procedural actions," he whispered. Jonah's eyes narrowed. "That means they will use the system," he said. "Police, social services, anything that makes them look clean while they squeeze you." Lena turned the letter over. There was a time, a location, and one line that made Elias's skin prickle. "Mr. Thorne appreciates your sense of fairness. He believes you may be capable of helping him correct internal issues." Elias stared. They were not only trying to retrieve the card, they were trying to absorb him, to turn him into an asset, to turn the force he had become into something owned. Jonah saw Elias's face and understood. "They think they can buy you," he said softly, "or at least contain you." Lena exhaled slowly. "Tessa was right," she murmured. "He wants the narrative." Elias swallowed. "What do I do?" Lena looked at Jonah. Jonah looked at Elias. The three of them held the question like a fragile object. Then Lena said, "We do not decide alone." She reached for the phone and called Tessa. The lawyer answered quickly, her voice alert. Lena explained the letter, read the key lines, and described the meeting details. Tessa's response was immediate. "Do not let him transport the boy," she said. "If you go, you choose the ride. You bring witnesses. And you make the meeting public enough that he cannot rewrite what happened." Jonah scoffed. "Public enough," he said. "He lives in glass and still hides." Tessa's tone stayed calm. "Then you bring your own glass," she said. "You record. You have a neutral mediator. You have at least one third-party witness he did not hire. And you keep the boy's legal status protected." Lena nodded, even though Tessa could not see her. "We can do that." Elias's heart pounded. "You want me to meet him?" Tessa's voice softened just a little. "Elias," she said, and when she used his name, it felt like a hand on his shoulder. "I want you safe, but I also want you to understand something. Men like Thorne do not stop because you hide. They stop when the cost of pursuing you becomes higher than the benefit." Jonah muttered. "He will make the benefit feel personal." Tessa continued. "If you meet him on terms you control, you gain information, you gain leverage. You see what he wants." Elias felt the room tilt slightly. He had never thought of leverage as something he could hold. Leverage was something rich men used. It was what moved bulldozers and cleared sidewalks. But right now, Elias's existence had become leverage. Lena set the meeting condition with Tessa's help. They responded by email to the contact address provided in the letter. Neutral location. A community mediation center downtown with security and cameras. Elias would arrive with Lena, Jonah, And Tessa, the meeting would be recorded. No private transport. No isolation. The reply came within an hour, as if Thorne had been waiting with his finger on a button. Agreed. No argument. No pushback. That terrified Jonah more than resistance would have. He is confident, Jonah said as they prepared. He thinks he will still win. Lena's jaw tightened. Then we do not let him, she said. 2 hours later, Elias sat in the back seat of Lena's old car, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Jonah sat in the passenger seat, watching the street mirrors, like he expected something to jump out. The city blurred past, gray buildings and wet pavement. Elias's stomach twisted with every block closer to downtown. He thought about Thorne's face in photos. Sharp, controlled, untouchable. He thought about what it meant for a man like that to request a meeting with a homeless boy. It meant Elias had touched something real. The mediation center was a plain building with a metal detector at the entrance and a receptionist behind thick glass. The lobby smelled like stale coffee and printer paper. It was not glamorous. That was the point. Thorne's world was polished. This place was functional. It belonged to bureaucracy and conflict, not luxury. Tessa met them there, a woman in her late 30s with a sharp gaze and a calm presence that felt like armor. She crouched slightly to Elias's height, not in a patronizing way, but in a way that signaled equality. You are going to do 3 things in there, she said quietly. You are going to tell the truth. You are going to stay calm, and you are going to let silence work for you. Do not fill silence. Let him fill it. Elias nodded, throat tight. They were escorted into a small conference room with a round table, a camera mounted in the corner, and a second device placed by Tessa on the table, recording independently. They waited. Elias could hear his own breathing. Then the door opened. Malcolm Thorne entered with 2 men in suits who did not introduce themselves. Thorne looked exactly like his photos, except the real version carried something the camera never captured: pressure. A contained intensity, like a storm behind glass. His eyes found Elias immediately. The room went quiet. Thorne did not smile. Smiles were too vulnerable. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement that felt like he was granting Elias existence. Elias, Thorne said, pronouncing the name carefully. Thank you for coming. Elias did not answer right away. He looked at Thorne's hands. Clean, controlled, no tremor. A man who believed his hands shaped the world. Lena spoke first. We are here under mediation conditions, she said. This meeting is recorded. We represent the miners' interests. Thorne's gaze slid to her, then to Tessa. Of course, he said smoothly. I agreed to your conditions because I am not here to harm anyone. I am here to resolve a situation. Jonah's voice came low. And to protect yourself. Thorne's eyes flicked to Jonah, and for the first time, a crack of irritation showed. I do not believe we have met. Jonah leaned back slightly. You have met my kind, he said. Just usually from above. Thorne ignored him and focused on Elias again. You have something that belongs to my company, he said. An access card. That alone is enough to create risk. I want it back. Elias's voice came out quiet. I found it. I know, Thorne said. My team confirmed a contractor lost it. Elias felt anger rise. Then why are you following me? Thorne did not blink. Because something else happened, he said. My internal systems began surfacing information. Compliance alerts triggered. Reports generated. Internal tensions escalated. This started around the same time the card went missing. Tessa's tone sharpened. Correlation is not proof. Thorne's gaze moved to her, polite but cold. Of course, he said. That is why I am here. He leaned forward slightly, folding his hands on the table. Elias, I grew up poor, he said, and Jonah let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Thorne's eyes flicked toward Jonah again, then returned to Elias. I grew up watching adults lie to survive, Thorne continued. Watching people steal because they believed the world owed them. I learned early that trust is a luxury. I do not indulge in luxuries. Elias stared at him. You have everything, Elias said. How is trust a luxury for you? A tiny twitch moved in Thorne's jaw, like a nerve jumping. Because everything you have can be taken, Thorne said. Especially when you let people near it. Jonah's voice came sharp. So you take first. Thorne ignored him again, as if Jonah was a noise he refused to validate. Elias, he said, I am not your enemy, but I will be honest. If someone is using you to access my systems, you are in danger. You are a child. You do not understand the forces you have stirred. Elias's hands clenched under the table. I understand people got hurt, he said. I understand you cleared places where people slept. Thorne's eyes narrowed slightly. That was city redevelopment, he said. Legal. Legal does not mean right, Elias said, and his voice surprised even him with its steadiness. The room shifted. Lena inhaled sharply. Jonah's eyes flared with approval. Thorne stared at Elias for a long moment, and something in his expression changed. Not softness, not kindness, something like assessment, as if he had just realized the boy across the table was not easily dismissed. You are articulate, Thorne said. Elias did not react. Thorne continued, voice still controlled. I have reviewed the compliance flags, he said. They are precise. They target issues that could destabilize my company. They surface patterns that even my executives overlooked. Tessa's eyes narrowed. You are suggesting a child orchestrated an internal audit of your empire. Thorne's gaze stayed on Elias. I am suggesting the one who did this understands systems, he said, and understands where my company is vulnerable. Elias felt his heart pound. The room seemed too small for Thorne's attention. Thorne reached into his suit jacket and pulled out another envelope. He slid it across the table toward Elias. Elias did not touch it. Thorne's voice was even. Inside is an offer, he said. A scholarship. A place in a private program. Housing, food, education, safety. You will not sleep outside again. Elias's mouth went dry. Thorne leaned closer, and his eyes sharpened. And in return, he said quietly, you tell me exactly what you did, how you did it, who helped you, and you helped me close the cracks. Jonah's chair scraped slightly as he leaned forward. There it is, Jonah said. Buy the boy. Patch the fortress. Thorne's eyes flashed. I am offering him a life, he said. A way out. Jonah's voice stayed hard. You are offering him a leash. Elias stared at the envelope, and his mind raced. Housing, food, safety, school. Everything he had told himself not to want, because wanting it would make him weak. He could almost feel the warmth of the bed that belonged to him. He could almost taste the relief of not waking up cold and terrified. But he also felt something else, something heavier. If he took the offer, he would belong to Thorne's story. He would become proof that Thorne was generous, that Thorne was saving a kid, that Thorne was not the villain. And the people under bridges would still be invisible. Elias swallowed. Why? He asked, voice tight. Do you care what I did? Thorne's gaze held him. Because, Thorne said, you have already proven you can move my world, and I do not allow anything in my world that I do not control. Silence filled the room like smoke. Tessa's voice cut through it, calm and sharp. That statement is recorded, she said. Thorne did not flinch. Good, he replied. Then you will understand the truth. I am not a man who pretends to be soft. I solve problems. Elias looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw something behind Thorne's eyes that made his stomach twist. Fear. Not fear of Elias as a child. Fear of what Elias represented. A crack. A truth Thorne could not buy. Elias's voice came out low. If I tell you, Elias said, you will just hide it again. Thorne's jaw tightened. If you do not tell me, he said, I will find out anyway. Elias felt Jonah's hand land gently on his shoulder from behind, steadying him. Lena leaned forward. Elias, she said softly, you do not have to answer anything you do not want to. Thorne's gaze cut to Lena. He does, Thorne said, because he is standing in the middle of forces that will crush him if he does not choose a side. Tessa's eyes narrowed. He is not choosing sides, she said. He is choosing safety. Thorne's voice went colder. Safety is a side. Elias stared at the envelope and felt the room narrowing around him, like the moment before a storm breaks, because he understood now. This meeting was not about an access card. It was about ownership. Thorne wanted to own the boy who had reached into his fortress and moved the pieces without permission. And Elias, sitting at a table with a billionaire, who did not believe in mercy, had to decide whether warmth was worth surrendering the one thing he still had that Thorne could not buy: his conscience. The offer arrived the next morning in a white envelope that looked too clean for the shelter's worn front desk. No logo, no return address. Just Elias's name written in neat, careful handwriting, as if whoever wrote it wanted to prove they understood respect. Lena held it between two fingers like it might bite. Jonah stood beside her, arms folded, watching the lobby with a tension that never fully left his shoulders. Elias stared at the envelope, his stomach tight. "Do not open it," Jonah said. Lena shook her head once. "We open it," she corrected. "We document it. We do not let them control the story." She slid her phone out, switched on the camera, and recorded as she carefully tore the envelope along the edge. Inside was a single card of thick paper, and a second sheet printed with short, polite sentences. The card read, "Malcolm Thorne, CEO, Thorne Consolidated." Elias felt a strange jolt. Seeing the name on paper made it more real than any article or photo. Lena read the letter aloud, her voice flat and controlled. "Mr. Thorne is aware that you have come into possession of company property. He is not interested in involving law enforcement. He understands the difficulty of your circumstances. He would like to meet you personally in a safe, neutral environment to discuss a peaceful resolution. Transportation will be provided. A meal will be provided. No questions will be asked beyond what is necessary. We hope you will accept this opportunity to start fresh." Jonah let out a short sound of disgust. "Start fresh," he repeated. "That is what they say when they want you to forget what you saw." Lena kept reading. "If you decline, please return the access card immediately to the enclosed courier. Failure to return the card may result in necessary procedural actions." Elias's mouth went dry. "Procedural actions," he whispered. Jonah's eyes narrowed. "That means they will use the system," he said. "Police, social services, anything that makes them look clean while they squeeze you." Lena turned the letter over. There was a time, a location, and one line that made Elias's skin prickle. "Mr. Thorne appreciates your sense of fairness. He believes you may be capable of helping him correct internal issues." Elias stared. They were not only trying to retrieve the card, they were trying to absorb him, to turn him into an asset, to turn the force he had become into something owned. Jonah saw Elias's face and understood. "They think they can buy you," he said softly. "Or at least contain you." Lena exhaled slowly. "Tessa was right," she murmured. "He wants the narrative." Elias swallowed. "What do I do?" Lena looked at Jonah. Jonah looked at Elias. The three of them held the question like a fragile object. Then Lena said, "We do not decide alone." She reached for the phone and called Tessa. The lawyer answered quickly, her voice alert. Lena explained the letter, read the key lines, and described the meeting details. Tessa's response was immediate. "Do not let him transport the boy," she said. "If you go, you choose the ride. You bring witnesses, and you make the meeting public enough that he cannot rewrite what happened." Jonah scoffed. "Public enough," he said. "He lives in glass and still hides." Tessa's tone stayed calm. "Then you bring your own glass," she said. "You record. You have a neutral mediator. You have at least one third-party witness he did not hire. And you keep the boy's legal status protected." Lena nodded, even though Tessa could not see her. "We can do that." Elias's heart pounded. "You want me to meet him?" Tessa's voice softened just a little. "Elias," she said, and when she used his name, it felt like a hand on his shoulder. "I want you safe, but I also want you to understand something. Men like Thorne do not stop because you hide. They stop when the cost of pursuing you becomes higher than the benefit." Jonah muttered, "He will make the benefit feel personal." Tessa continued, "If you meet him on terms you control, you gain information. You gain leverage. You see what he wants." Elias felt the room tilt slightly. He had never thought of leverage as something he could hold. Leverage was something rich men used. It was what moved bulldozers and cleared sidewalks. But right now, Elias's existence had become leverage. Lena set the meeting condition with Tessa's help. They responded by email to the contact address provided in the letter. Neutral location. a community mediation center downtown with security and cameras. Elias would arrive with Lena, Jonah, and Tessa. The meeting would be recorded. No private transport, no isolation. The reply came within an hour, as if Thorne had been waiting with his finger on a button. Agreed. No argument. No pushback. That terrified Jonah more than resistance would have. He is confident, Jonah said as they prepared. He thinks he will still win. Lena's jaw tightened. Then we do not let him, she said. 2 hours later, Elias sat in the back seat of Lena's old car, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Jonah sat in the passenger seat, watching the street mirrors, like he expected something to jump out. The city blurred past, gray buildings and wet pavement. Elias's stomach twisted with every block closer to downtown. He thought about Thorne's face in photos. Sharp, controlled, untouchable. He thought about what it meant for a man like that to request a meeting with a homeless boy. It meant Elias had touched something real. The mediation center was a plain building with a metal detector at the entrance and a receptionist behind thick glass. The lobby smelled like stale coffee and printer paper. It was not glamorous. That was the point. Thorne's world was polished. This place was functional. It belonged to bureaucracy and conflict, not luxury. Tessa met them there, a woman in her late 30s with a sharp gaze and a calm presence that felt like armor. She crouched slightly to Elias's height, not in a patronizing way, but in a way that signaled equality. You are going to do 3 things in there, she said quietly. You are going to tell the truth. You are going to stay calm. And you are going to let silence work for you. Do not fill silence. Let him fill it. Elias nodded, throat tight. They were escorted into a small conference room with a round table, a camera mounted in the corner, and a second device placed by Tessa on the table, recording independently. They waited. Elias could hear his own breathing. Then the door opened. Malcolm Thorne entered with 2 men in suits, who did not introduce themselves. Thorne looked exactly like his photos, except the real version carried something the camera never captured: pressure, a contained intensity, like a storm behind glass. His eyes found Elias immediately. The room went quiet. Thorne did not smile. Smiles were too vulnerable. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement that felt like he was granting Elias existence. Elias, Thorne said, pronouncing the name carefully. Thank you for coming. Elias did not answer right away. He looked at Thorne's hands. Clean, controlled, no tremor. A man who believed his hands shaped the world. Lena spoke first. We are here under mediation conditions, she said. This meeting is recorded. We represent the miners' interests. Thorne's gaze slid to her, then to Tessa. Of course, he said smoothly. I agreed to your conditions because I am not here to harm anyone. I am here to resolve the situation. Jonah's voice came low. And to protect yourself. Thorne's eyes flicked to Jonah, and for the first time, a crack of irritation showed. I do not believe we have met. Jonah leaned back slightly. You have met my kind, he said. Just usually from above. Thorne ignored him and focused on Elias again. You have something that belongs to my company, he said. An access card. That alone is enough to create risk. I want it back. Elias's voice came out quiet. I found it. I know, Thorne said. My team confirmed a contractor lost it. Elias felt anger rise. Then why are you following me? Thorne did not blink. Because something else happened, he said. My internal systems began surfacing information. Compliance alerts triggered. Reports generated. Internal tensions escalated. This started around the same time the card went missing. Tessa's tone sharpened. Correlation is not proof. Thorne's gaze moved to her, polite but cold. Of course, he said. That is why I am here. He leaned forward slightly, folding his hands on the table. Elias, I grew up poor, he said, and Jonah let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Thorne's eyes flicked toward Jonah again, then returned to Elias. I grew up watching adults lie to survive, Thorne continued. Watching people steal because they believed the world owed them. I learned early that trust is a luxury. I do not indulge in luxuries. Elias stared at him. You have everything, Elias said. How is trust a luxury for you? A tiny twitch moved in Thorne's jaw, like a nerve jumping. Because everything you have can be taken, Thorne said, especially when you let people near it. Jonah's voice came sharp. So you take first. Thorne ignored him again, as if Jonah was a noise he refused to validate. Elias, he said, I am not your enemy. But I will be honest. If someone is using you to access my systems, you are in danger. You are a child. You do not understand the forces you have stirred. Elias's hands clenched under the table. I understand people got hurt, he said. I understand you cleared places where people slept. Thorne's eyes narrowed slightly. That was city redevelopment, he said. Legal. Legal does not mean right, Elias said, and his voice surprised even him with its steadiness. The room shifted. Lena inhaled sharply. Jonah's eyes flared with approval. Thorne stared at Elias for a long moment, and something in his expression changed. Not softness, not kindness, something like assessment, as if he had just realized the boy across the table was not easily dismissed. You are articulate, Thorne said. Elias did not react. Thorne continued, voice still controlled. I have reviewed the compliance flags, he said. They are precise. They target issues that could destabilize my company. They surface patterns that even my executives overlooked. Tessa's eyes narrowed. You are suggesting a child orchestrated an internal audit of your empire. Thorne's gaze stayed on Elias. I am suggesting the one who did this understands systems, he said, and understands where my company is vulnerable. Elias felt his heart pound. The room seemed too small for Thorne's attention. Thorne reached into his suit jacket and pulled out another envelope. He slid it across the table toward Elias. Elias did not touch it. Thorne's voice was even. Inside is an offer, he said. A scholarship. A place in a private program. Housing, food, education, safety. You will not sleep outside again. Elias's mouth went dry. Thorne leaned closer, and his eyes sharpened. And in return, he said quietly, you tell me exactly what you did, how you did it, who helped you, and you helped me close the cracks. Jonah's chair scraped slightly as he leaned forward. There it is, Jonah said. Buy the boy, patch the fortress. Thorne's eyes flashed. I am offering him a life, he said. A way out. Jonah's voice stayed hard. You are offering him a leash. Elias stared at the envelope, and his mind raced. Housing, food, safety, school. Everything he had told himself not to want, because wanting it would make him weak. He could almost feel the warmth of a bed that belonged to him. He could almost taste the relief of not waking up cold and terrified. But he also felt something else, something heavier. If he took the offer, he would belong to Thorne's story. He would become proof that Thorne was generous, that Thorne was saving a kid, that Thorne was not the villain, and that people under bridges would still be invisible. Elias swallowed. Why? He asked, voice tight. Do you care what I did? Thorne's gaze held him. Because, Thorne said, you have already proven you can move my world, and I do not allow anything in my world that I do not control. Silence filled the room like smoke. Tessa's voice cut through it, calm and sharp. That statement is recorded, she said. Thorne did not flinch. Good, he replied. Then you will understand the truth. I am not a man who pretends to be soft. I solve problems. Elias looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw something behind Thorne's eyes that made his stomach twist. Fear. Not fear of Elias as a child. Fear of what Elias represented. A crack. A truth Thorne could not buy. Elias's voice came out low. If I tell you, Elias said, you will just hide it again. Thorne's jaw tightened. If you do not tell me, he said, I will find out anyway. Elias felt Jonah's hand land gently on his shoulder from behind, steadying him. Lena leaned forward. Elias, she said softly, you do not have to answer anything you do not want to. Thorne's gaze cut to Lena. He does, Thorne said, because he is standing in the middle of forces that will crush him if he does not choose a side. Tessa's eyes narrowed. He is not choosing sides, she said. He is choosing safety. Thorne's voice went colder. Safety is a side. Elias stared at the envelope and felt the room narrowing around him, like the moment before a storm breaks, because he understood now. This meeting was not about an access card. It was about ownership. Thorne wanted to own the boy who had reached into his fortress and moved the pieces without permission. And Elias, sitting at a table with a billionaire, who did not believe in mercy, had to decide whether warmth was worth surrendering the one thing he still had that Thorne could not buy: his conscience. Elias did not touch the envelope. For a long moment, he just looked at it as if it were a living thing. The paper was thick. The seal was clean. Everything about it felt like a promise written in the language of people who had never slept with one eye open. Malcolm Thorne watched Elias with the stillness of a man who thought patience could win any battle. His hands remained folded. His posture remained perfect. But his eyes stayed locked, hungry for a decision. Elias's voice came out quiet. "If I take this," he said, "I belong to you." Thorne's expression did not change. "If you take it," he said, "you belong to a future. You stop surviving and start living." Jonah's laugh was sharp and humorless. "A future on his terms." Thorne's eyes flicked toward Jonah like a blade. "You are not helping," he said. Jonah leaned back, unbothered. "I am helping the kids see the hook inside the bait," he replied. Tessa's voice stayed controlled. Thorne," she said, "you are offering benefits in exchange for information. Let us be clear about that." Thorne's gaze shifted to her. "I am offering a path," he said, "and I am requesting honesty." Tessa nodded once. "Honesty works both ways," she said. "So answer this. If Elias tells you what he did, what happens to the information your system surfaced? The encampment clearances, the vendor chains, the internal emails." Thorne's jaw tightened. "We handle it internally," he said. "We correct what needs correction." Jonah scoffed. "You bury what needs burying." Thorne's eyes sharpened. "I do not bury," he said. "I manage risk." Elias heard that phrase and felt something cold settle inside him. Manage risk. That was what Thorne called other people's pain. Elias looked up. "When you cleared the encampments," he said, "did you manage their risk?" Thorne did not answer immediately. The silence was thick enough to taste. Then he said very carefully, "Cities evolve. Not everyone can be accommodated." Elias's chest tightened. He remembered the older woman's blanket crushed into mud. He remembered the way people scattered like animals. He remembered realizing the city could decide you did not deserve space. Jonah's voice came low. "There it is," he said. "He cannot even say it was wrong." Thorne's eyes flicked again, irritation flaring. "I did not come here to be tried by strangers," he said. Tessa's tone turned razor sharp. "Then do not act like you are the judge over everyone else," she replied. Thorne leaned forward slightly. The temperature in the room dropped. "Elias," he said, returning his attention to the boy, "you can walk out of here and go back to sleeping outside. Or you can accept help and be safe. That is reality. Nobody in this room can change that." Elias felt the pressure behind the words. Not a threat spoken loudly, but a threat built into the structure of the world. Thorne did not need to hurt him physically. The system would hurt him for free. Lena leaned in. "You are not his only option," she said, voice steady. "We have resources. We have legal aid. We have placements." Thorne's lips tightened. "Temporary," he said. "Fragile. Unreliable." Elias stared at Thorne and realized something that made his skin Thorne was not just offering help. He was trying to make every other kind of help seem small. Because if Elias believed only Thorne could save him, Elias would become dependent, and dependency was control. Elias took a slow breath. He looked at Tessa's recorder on the table. He looked at the camera in the corner. He looked at Jonah and Lena, witnesses, records, glass that did not belong to Thorne. Elias's voice came out steadier than he felt. "I did not hack you," he said. Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Then explain," he said. Elias swallowed. "I did not have money," he continued. "I did not have tools. I did not have a computer that belonged to me. I had a library terminal." Thorne's gaze sharpened, impatient. Elias forced himself to continue. "I read about your company," he said. "I read about the clearances. I read about the contractors and the delays. I read about the way your system works, because your company brags about it. You brag about security. You brag about automation. You brag about compliance." Thorne's jaw tightened. Elias looked him directly in the eyes. "So I did not break your walls," Elias said. "I walked through the doors you left open, because you were too busy trusting machines." For the first time, Thorne's face shifted. Not much. Just enough to show that the words landed like a punch. Tessa's eyes stayed on Elias, careful and encouraging. Jonah's mouth tightened with approval. Lena's eyes shone with something that looked like relief. Thorne's voice went colder. What doors? Elias took another breath. Your contractor dropped an access card, he said. I kept it because it felt like proof. Proof that your tower was not perfect, that even you made mistakes. Thorne's eyes flashed, but Elias pushed on before Thorne could interrupt. I did not use the card to enter your building, Elias said, but I used it to learn. I used it to look up what systems you use, what vendors you work with, what public portals your subsidiaries use for small contractors, what hotlines exist for internal reporting. Thorne's eyebrows lifted slightly, a fraction of surprise. Elias's voice stayed steady. Your company has public-facing forms, he said. Complaint forms, ethics forms, vendor forms. Some are for contractors. Some are for employees. Some are for the public. They are designed to collect information and route it. Thorne's gaze sharpened. Those forms are monitored. Elias nodded. Yes, he said. But you trained your system to trust the form if it looks like the right kind of report. You trained it to route and trigger and notify. You built a machine that reacts to keywords, to document attachments, to vendor IDs. Thorne's face tightened. You are saying you exploited automation? Elias nodded again. I did not steal money, he said. I did not move accounts. I did not need to. He paused, then said the sentence that made the room feel like it stopped breathing. I made your own systems look at what they were trained to ignore. Thorne's fingers flexed on the table, the first visible sign of loss of control. Elias continued, voice low and controlled. I found public documents in public filings, he said. I found articles. I found old leaked memos that were already out there, if you looked hard enough. I found complaint records from the city. I found vendor names in public contracts. Then I used your own reporting pathways to attach those names to internal triggers, not to expose new secrets, but to force your company to connect dots you worked hard to keep separate. Tessa nodded slowly, understanding the shape of it. Jonah's eyes narrowed, seeing the moral architecture. Lena looked stunned. Thorne's voice was clipped. And the internal emails. Elias swallowed. Some of them were already in regulatory archives, he said. Some were in old litigation records. Sealed does not mean erased. It means hidden. Hidden can be found. Thorne's jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed something else again. Fear, not of theft, of exposure. Elias leaned forward slightly. The first time he matched Thorne's posture. You did not lose control because of me, Elias said. You lost control because you built your empire on distrust. You built it to suspect people instead of fixing what was wrong. So when your own system started pointing at your own cracks, you turned on your employees. You made them fear each other. That is what made it spread. The words hung in the air. Thorne stared at Elias, and for a moment, the billionaire looked like a man who had been forced to see his reflection in broken glass. Then Thorne's voice dropped. Why? He asked, quieter now. Why would a boy with nothing do this? Elias's throat tightened. This was the core. The part he had not wanted to say, because it sounded too raw, too honest, because nobody saw us. Elias said, you cleared our places like we were trash. You built towers and called it progress. You donated money and called it kindness. But you never looked at us. You never had to. Thorne's face tightened again, but his eyes did not leave Elias. Elias continued, I did not do this to get rich, he said. I did not do this to ruin you. I did this because you made the world feel like it belonged only to people like you. And I wanted you to feel, just once, what it is like to have no safe place to stand. Silence filled the room. The mediation center's hum sounded louder. Thorne's two suited men shifted, uncomfortable. They were used to meetings where poor people stayed grateful. This was not that. Tessa's voice was careful. R. Thorne, she said. The boy has answered. He has not confessed to criminal intrusion. He has described using public pathways to trigger internal attention. Thorne did not look at her. He kept staring at Elias. When Thorne spoke again, His voice had changed. It was still controlled, still sharp, but there was something underneath it, something almost reluctant. "You have a mind," Thorne said. "A dangerous mind." Elias did not flinch. "You mean," Elias said, "a mind you cannot buy." Jonah exhaled slowly, like he had been holding his breath for years. Thorne's jaw tightened, and, unexpectedly, he leaned back. He looked away for the first time, toward the window, toward the city. When he spoke again, he did not sound triumphant. He sounded tired. "I spent my life believing trust was weakness," Thorne said, "because the first time I trusted, it destroyed me." Jonah's voice came low. "So you decided to destroy first." Thorne's eyes flicked to Jonah, then away again. "I decided," Thorne said, "that nobody would ever corner me again." He looked back at Elias. "And now a boy with nothing corners me in a mediation room with cameras," he said, as if the irony tasted bitter. Elias's throat tightened. He expected Thorne to lash out. He expected threats. He expected the polished cruelty of a man who could make people disappear with a phone call. Instead, Thorne sat very still. Then he pushed the envelope across the table again, but this time his hand did not linger possessively. It was almost hesitant. "Take it," Thorne said. "Not as payment, as protection." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "Protection bought by obedience." Thorne's voice sharpened. "No," he said, "protection bought by reality. The boy is now visible. Visibility is dangerous." Tessa watched Thorne carefully. "What are your conditions?" she asked. Thorne's gaze moved to her, and his voice became businesslike. "The access card returns to me today," he said. "Elias will enter a legitimate educational program that I fund, but one that is managed by an independent board, not my company, not my staff. He will have legal representation at every step. Your organization will oversee." Tessa blinked slightly, surprised. "And the internal issues?" Thorne's eyes narrowed. "I will authorize an external compliance audit," he said. "A real one, not my own people. And I will cooperate with findings." Jonah's laugh was soft, incredulous. "You expect us to believe that?" Thorne's eyes flashed. "You do not have to believe me," he said. "You just have to watch me. That is what you wanted, is it not? Eyes, records, witnesses." He looked at Elias again. "You wanted me to see you," Thorne said. "Fine. I see you." Elias felt his chest tighten. The words were simple, but they landed like a weight. "Not because they were kind, because they were true," Thorne continued, voice low. "And because I see you," he said, "I am also forced to see what I have trained myself not to see." He looked down at his hands briefly, as if studying them for the first time. "I cannot undo everything," Thorne said, "but I can stop pretending that being untouchable is the same as being right." The room held its breath again. Tessa spoke carefully. "If you are serious, we will put it in writing," she said. "Audits, oversight, no private control over the minor. This will be enforceable." Thorne nodded once. "Do it," he said. Jonah stared at Thorne, searching for a trick. "Why?" Jonah asked, voice hard. "Why not crush him?" "You could. People like you always can." Thorne's eyes flicked to Jonah, and for a moment the billionaire's mask broke enough to show something raw. "Because," Thorne said quietly, "I already did crush people, over and over, and it did not make the fear go away." He looked back at Elias, and his voice turned colder again, like he could not tolerate softness for too long. "And because," he added, "if I crush a boy for forcing my company to look at itself, then I become exactly what the world already suspects I am." Jonah's mouth tightened. "So this is reputation." Thorne's gaze did not flinch. "Partly," he admitted. "But not only." Elias stared at Thorne and saw the truth in it, twisted and imperfect. Thorne was not suddenly good. He was not suddenly healed. He was a man who had lived so long in a fortress that the first time a crack let real air in, he did not know whether it was poison or relief. Elias reached into his bag, pulled out the access card, and placed it on the table. His hand lingered for a heartbeat, then released it. Thorne stared at the card, then at Elias. "You could have kept fighting," Thorne said. Elias's voice was quiet. "I am still fighting," he said, "just not alone." Lena's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She reached out and covered Elias's hand with hers for a moment, then pulled away as if afraid to overwhelm him. Tessa gathered her papers. "We will draft the agreement," she said. "You will sign it, and your company will comply." Thorne nodded. As he stood to leave, he paused and looked at Elias again. His voice was low enough that it felt like it was meant only for the boy, even though everyone heard it. "You did not dismantle my empire with a weapon," Thorne said. "You dismantled it with a mirror." Elias did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply held Thorne's gaze. "Good," Elias said. Thorne's mouth tightened, almost a smile, but not quite. Then he turned and walked out, his 2 men following, the door shutting behind them. For a long moment, the room stayed quiet. Jonah exhaled slowly, like he was releasing a lifetime of tension. "Kid," he said, voice softer now, "you just made a billionaire blink." Elias looked down at the table, at the place where the card had been. He felt hollow and full at the same time. Lena stepped closer. "How do you feel?" she asked. Elias swallowed. "Cold," he admitted. Then he added, honest, but not invisible. Tessa packed up her recorder and met Elias's eyes. "This is not the end," she said. "Men like him do not change in one day. But you did something rare. You forced accountability without becoming what you hate." Elias nodded slowly. Outside the mediation center, the city moved on, indifferent. Cars honked. People rushed. The river kept flowing. But somewhere in a glass tower, a man who had built his life on absolute distrust was now staring at the first real cost of isolation. Not the money, not the headlines. The cost was that, for the first time in years, Malcolm Thorne could not unsee the boy he had treated like background noise. And for the first time, Elias had a bed for the night, witnesses in his corner, and a future that did not depend on surrendering his conscience. Because the real victory was not that the empire shook. It was that a lonely billionaire finally learned the thing he had spent a lifetime denying. A fortress does not keep you safe. It just keeps you alone. The agreement was ink on paper, but paper only mattered if the world decided to respect it. For the first week after the mediation, Elias slept like his body did not trust the warmth yet. He woke up too fast, too often, searching corners with his eyes, listening for footsteps that were not there. The youth room at the shelter had a door that closed, but Elias still kept his shoes within arm's reach. His survival instincts did not retire just because a billionaire had signed something. Lena watched him in the mornings with a quiet kind of patience, the kind that did not demand quick healing. Jonah drifted in and out of the shelter like a guard dog who refused to admit he cared, bringing small things without explanation, an extra scarf, a better pair of gloves, a sandwich wrapped in foil. Elias never thanked him with words. He thanked him by eating without looking over his shoulder as much. Tessa moved fast because she knew speed was a form of protection. She filed the documentation, registered the oversight structure, and made sure the scholarship program Thorne offered could not be controlled by Thorne's company through hidden strings. A board was formed, imperfect but real. Educators, legal advocates, social workers, and one uncomfortable seat for a corporate representative who could not sign anything without witnesses. That corporate representative was not one of Thorne's men in suits. It was Myra Vallon, compliance. Myra arrived at the shelter one afternoon without a security detail. She wore a plain coat and carried a folder thick enough to scare most people. Lena met her at the front desk, eyes narrowed. "If this is a trick," Lena warned. "It is not," Myra said. Her voice was firm, but her gaze carried fatigue. "I did not volunteer for this seat to help him. I volunteered to prevent him from rewriting it." Elias watched from a distance, tense. Myra saw him and did not smile. She nodded once, the same small acknowledgement Thorne had given, but without the arrogance. "I am not your friend," Myra said to Elias when they sat in the back office. "I am here because my job is to make systems obey rules. And right now, the system is trying to swallow you." Elias's hands clenched. "Is he still watching?" Elias asked. Myra did not pretend. "He is always watching," she said. "But he is being watched now, too." That was the first time Elias understood something important. Power did not disappear. Power only shifted when enough eyes forced it to. In Meridian Crown Tower, the external audit began like a storm building inside a sealed room. Consultants arrived with laptops and calm voices. Executives smiled too hard. Legal teams reworded documents late into the night. Meetings multiplied like insects. Malcolm Thorne did not attend most of the early sessions. He stayed in his office, watching the company move as if it belonged to someone else. The first resignation hit on day 9. A senior executive left with a statement about personal reasons that fooled nobody. Then another followed. Then a mid-level manager requested immunity in exchange for cooperation with auditors. Rumors spread that regulators would soon request formal inquiries. Thorne's company had always been built to survive external threats. It was not built to survive internal truth. Thorne found himself standing one night in the same glass room where he had first seen the stuttering screens. The city glittered below. The river cut through the darkness like a blade. He looked at the surveillance wall and realized he had stopped trusting it. Not because it failed him, but because it revealed him. A message arrived from Myra. Audit team requesting your direct participation. They found patterns in subcontractor chains. They will not proceed without your answers. Thorne stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, schedule it tomorrow. When the session came, Thorne sat at a plain conference table with people who did not fear him the way his employees did. They asked questions with neutral faces. They requested documents with steady voices. They did not flatter him. They did not apologize for discomfort. For the first time in years, Thorne could not solve the problem by intimidating it. The auditors showed him a timeline of decisions. Not illegal, they noted, but engineered. Consequences not intended, he had always told himself. Yet the consequences were so consistent, they no longer looked accidental. Thorne's jaw tightened as he stared at the charts. You act like I wanted suffering, he said. One auditor, an older woman with clear eyes, replied, we are not here to decide what you wanted. We are here to decide what you built. Those words hit Thorne harder than any accusation. Because he had built a machine that made suffering efficient. That same week, Elias started school again. Not the kind of school shown in glossy brochures. It was a small program designed for youth who had missed too much, who arrived with gaps and guarded eyes. Elias hated the first day. He hated the smell of clean hallways and the way teachers watched him carefully, as if kindness was a test he might fail. But he loved the library. Not the public one he used as shelter, but the school's library, where the books were not just escape, they were tools. He sat at a desk and opened a basic programming workbook and felt something settle in his chest, a kind of purpose that did not require stealing or begging. On the third day, a boy in his class asked him why he always watched the door. Elias answered honestly, because doors decide who matters. The other boy blinked, then shrugged. Here, the door opens, he said, like it was obvious. Elias wanted to believe him. Belief came slow. At the shelter, Jonah changed too, though he would have denied it with every breath. He started showing up earlier, before dinner line, to help unload donations. At first, he did it like he was killing time. Then he did it like it mattered. Lena watched him and did not tease him. She knew better than to shame a man into tenderness. One evening, Jonah handed Elias a folded paper. Job training sign up, Jonah said gruffly. For me, Elias stared. Why? Jonah's eyes darted away. Because, he muttered, I am tired of being a ghost. Elias nodded slowly. He understood that fatigue, that hunger for a life where you did not have to disappear to survive. Weeks passed, a month. Elias grew stronger in small ways. He gained weight. His hands healed. He stopped flinching at sudden laughter. He still did not trust easily, but he started trusting selectively, which was a form of wisdom he had never been taught, but had earned. Then came the day Thorne asked to see Elias again, not privately, not in a tower. Through the board, through Tussa, through rules. The meeting was held at the same mediation center, in the same plain room. Cameras still watched. Recorders still sat on the table. Witnesses still filled the seats. Thorne entered alone this time. No two men in suits. No silent threat in his shadow. He looked thinner, not in a sick way. In a pressured way, like a man whose body had finally learned that stress was not fuel, it was fire. Elias sat with Lena and Tessa nearby, Jonah behind him like a wall. Thorne nodded once. Elias did not speak first. He let silence do its work. Thorne looked at the table, then back up. The audit is not pleasant, Thorne said. Jonah muttered, good. Thorne ignored him, but without the old irritation. I authorized restitution for the encampment clearances, Thorne continued. Not charity. Restitution. It will fund transitional housing and legal advocacy for those displaced. Lena's breath caught. She had heard promises before, but she had not heard Thorne speak that word. Restitution meant admitting harm. Tessa's voice was steady. We will review the structure, she said. We will verify the delivery. Thorne nodded. You should, he said. He looked at Elias again. I am not asking you to forgive me, Thorne said. I do not deserve that from you. I am telling you I am making changes because I finally understand something. Elias watched him carefully. What? Elias asked. Thorne swallowed, and for a moment his control slipped enough to show something raw. That the world is not safer when I control everything, Thorne said. It is only quieter. Elias stared at him, and his voice came out low. Quiet for you, Elias said. Thorne nodded once. Yes. Jonah shifted behind Elias, surprised by the honesty. Thorne exhaled slowly. I will never be the kind of man you want me to be, Thorne said. I do not know how, but I can stop being the kind of man I was. Elias felt a strange heat behind his eyes. Not tears exactly, but the pressure of something he had carried too long. He asked the question he had not dared to ask before. Why are you telling me this? Elias said. Thorne's gaze held his. Because, Thorne said, you are the first person who touched my world without wanting something from it. You wanted it to be fair. Elias's fingers curled slightly. And will it be? Thorne's mouth tightened. Fair is a direction, he said, not a finish line. Elias let that sit. Then slowly he nodded once. Not forgiveness, not gratitude, just acknowledgement. When Thorne left, Jonah exhaled and shook his head. He is still a shark, Jonah said. Elias looked up at him. Maybe, Elias said, but even sharks have to swim in water. And now there are eyes in the water. Jonah stared at him for a moment, then huffed a laugh. Kid, he muttered, you are going to be trouble in the best way. That night, Elias returned to the shelter, then to his small room, and sat at a desk that belonged to him. He opened his programming workbook, pencil in hand. The city outside kept moving, indifferent as always. But Elias was no longer moving through it like a shadow. He had witnesses. He had a path. And somewhere high above, a lonely billionaire stared through glass at a world he could no longer pretend was made only for people like him. Because the price of mistrust was not only a collapsing empire, it was the moment you realized you had built a fortress so perfect that it kept out the one thing that could have saved you from yourself. Human connection.